in front of 800 people, his jaw tight with anger. His brothers stared at his shoes and said nothing. The woman standing at his side hid a satisfied grin behind her champagne glass. Zola left quietly. None of them had any idea what she was about to do next. The ballroom of the Whitfield Foundation Gala glowed like a jewelry box. Gold light spilled from 3 great chandeliers. Waiters moved like shadows carrying trays of crystal. 800 of the richest, proudest people in the city stood shoulder to shoulder, and every one of them had come to celebrate one man. His name was Amiri Whitfield, and tonight Amiri felt like a king. He stood near the stage in a black tuxedo cut so sharp it could draw blood. His smile was wide, his handshake was firm. For 2 years, the Whitfield family firm had been drowning, one missed payment away from collapse. And then, out of nowhere, a mystery investor had appeared and poured in a fortune. The company breathed again, and Amiri, who had begged and sweated in back rooms to make it happen, was being honored as the man who saved his family name. Cameras flashed. A reporter called his name. A senator shook his hand. Somewhere a string quartet played something soft and expensive. Amiri drank it all in like a man who had been thirsty his whole life. And in a way, he had. You do not understand a man like Amiri until you understand his thirst. He had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten his wife. Her name was Zola. She stood near the edge of the room wearing an elegant, soft peach dress. Not a designer gown, not diamonds, just a modest dress she had carefully stitched herself at the kitchen table 3 nights before. She looked calm. She looked kind. She looked, to every sneering eye in that ballroom, completely out of place. Watch her closely, because she is the only person here who knows the truth. A woman in a striking deep ruby-red couture evening gown drifted to Amiri's side. Her name was Gabrielle. She called herself a consultant. She wore success like perfume, and she had been whispering in Amiri's ear for months. She leaned close to him now, her eyes finding Zola across the floor, and she said, soft and cruel, "Is that really her, tonight, in that?" Amiri's jaw tightened. His smile cracked at the edges. He had spent 2 years climbing, and here was the woman from his poor beginnings, standing in his golden room, reminding everyone where he came from. 2 women near the bar looked Zola up and down and laughed behind their hands. A man in a velvet jacket muttered something about the help getting lost. Zola heard all of it. She always heard it. She had spent her whole life being the poorest person in rooms full of gold, and she had learned long ago that the cruelest people are the ones who are only 1 generation away from a dirt road themselves. She did not answer them. She simply looked for her husband. Zola saw his face change. She had seen that look before. She crossed the floor gently, holding a glass of water, and she reached for his arm the way a wife does. "Amiri," she said quietly, "you look tired. Have you eaten anything tonight?" He pulled his arm away like her touch burned. "What are you wearing?" he hissed under his breath. "I told you tonight was important." "I know. I made it myself. I thought." "You thought," he laughed, and it was not a kind laugh. A few heads turned. Gabrielle smiled into her champagne, and somewhere behind Amiri, his younger brother Terence shifted his weight and looked away, because Terence already felt what was coming, and Terence was a coward. Here is a question for you. When a man is ashamed of where he came from, who does he punish first? The person who remembers. "Everybody's watching," Amiri said, and now his voice was rising, and the people nearest went quiet to listen. "You know that? Everybody in this room is watching me tonight, and you show up looking like you're here to clean the floors." Zola did not flinch. "I came to stand with you," she said, "like I always have." "Well, don't." The word landed hard. "You embarrass me. You always have." 800 people. The music kept playing, but the air around them died. Zola's hand, still holding that glass of water, did not shake, but something behind her eyes went very still. "Amiri," she said, one last time, so soft only he could hear it. "Don't do this." And that was when he pointed at the door. "Out, now!" The words cut across the ballroom. Guests near the stage froze. A woman gasped. Amiri stood there with his arm out straight, finger aimed at the tall doors, his chest heaving, his pride a wildfire he could no longer control. "You don't belong at my table. You never did. Get out before you humiliate me any further." Zola looked at him. Then she looked at Terence, his own brother, who stared at his polished shoes and said nothing, nothing at all. Then she looked at Gabrielle, who lifted her glass just an inch, hiding a grin behind the rim like a cat hiding its teeth. Triple betrayal. The husband who cast her out, the family that stayed silent, the stranger who smiled. 3 knives, 1 night. Do you feel that? That thing in your chest right now? That heat, that wanting to yell? Zola felt it too. She was human. A part of her wanted to slap the champagne out of Gabrielle's hand and tell the whole room exactly who they were laughing at. But Miss Ruth's voice was louder. "Build it quiet, baby. Let them talk. Talkers never build a thing." And Zola? She simply set her glass of water down on the nearest table. She straightened her dress, and she walked. Head level, steps even. Past the whispers, past the phones lifting to film her shame, past the donor wall where the names of the gala's greatest patrons were carved in brass. Her fingers brushed one small plaque as she passed it. 3 words. The Sparrow Group. She let her hand rest there for half a second, and then she was gone, out into the night. The doors closed behind her with a soft, final click. Amiri exhaled. Gabrielle touched his shoulder. "You did the right thing," she murmured. "A man like you needs a woman who matches the view." And the narrator will tell you now what not one soul in that ballroom understood. The quietest woman in the room had just been thrown out of a building she owned. The gala, the chandeliers, the mystery fortune that saved the Whitfield name, all of it traced back through 100 quiet doors to her. But to understand what she did next, you have to know where she came from. Still water runs deep, and still water remembers. Rewind with me. 20 years and a whole world away. Before the chandeliers, there was a tin roof house at the end of a dirt road. When it rained, the roof sang. When the sun came, the metal baked. Inside that house lived a little girl named Zola and the grandmother who raised her, because Zola's mama had passed young and her daddy had gone looking for work one winter and never came home. The grandmother's name was Miss Ruth, and Miss Ruth cleaned houses. She left before the sun and came home after it dropped, her hands cracked from other people's floors, other people's dishes, other people's dirt. But she never came empty. Every evening she brought back one small thing, a lesson. "Baby," Miss Ruth would say, sitting on the porch steps with her aching feet in a basin of warm water, "You see that little bird up there?" She pointed to a sparrow building a nest under the eaves. Nobody gave that bird a home. Nobody handed her a thing. She builds it herself, twig by twig, while everybody looks up and thinks she's just singing. Then she would smile, tired and warm, and she would say the thing Zola would carry her whole life. A sparrow is never given a nest. She builds it her own. You hear me? You build your own, and you build it quiet, and one day they'll look up and wonder how high it got. For Zola's 10th birthday, Miss Ruth pressed something into her hand. It was a small wooden sparrow, hand-carved, no bigger than a thumb, smooth from all the times the old woman's fingers had worried over it. This was your mama's. Now it's yours. When the world tells you you're small, you hold this and you remember what small things can build. Zola never let it go, not once, not in 20 years. She kept it in her pocket on the day she buried Miss Ruth, who worked right up until the week her heart gave out, cleaning other people's floors so her grandmother would never have to. She held it in her fist at the graveside, that small wooden bird, and she made the old woman a promise into the dirt. "I'm gonna build it, Grandma, just like you said, and I'm gonna keep it quiet till it's too high for anybody to knock down." She was 21 years old that day. She had a bus ticket, a taped-up laptop, and a promise. That was all. She grew up soft. That is the truth, and I want you to hold on to it, because softness is not weakness, and this story will prove it. Zola grew up believing in kindness. She believed if you gave love, love came back. She believed a person's word was a bridge you could stand on. She forgave easy. She trusted easy. And she worked. Lord, that girl worked. Nights cleaning offices downtown, days at a community college, a second-hand laptop held together with tape, teaching herself numbers, teaching herself business, teaching herself how money moved through the world while the rich slept. And somewhere in those long nights, mopping the marble lobby of a glass tower, she made herself a promise. One day, I'll own a floor in a building like this. She was 19. She had $40 in a coffee can. That was the whole fortune of Zola back then. $40 and a wooden bird. Watch how a sparrow builds. She met Amiri when they were both young and both had nothing. He was charming then, full of dreams, and she loved him the way soft people love, completely, without holding back. When his family firm started to sink, it was Zola who sat up with him at the kitchen table. It was Zola who knew the numbers. It was Zola who quietly began to build something of her own on the side. A small holding company, one careful investment at a time, twig by twig, never bragging, never spending, letting it grow in the dark. She named it after the bird, the Sparrow Group, and she told no one, not even her husband, because Miss Ruth's voice was always in her ear. Build it quiet. And she was good at it. That is the part nobody expects. The soft-spoken woman everyone underestimated had a mind like a steel trap. She saw things before other people saw them. A neighborhood about to turn, a small company about to grow, a piece of land nobody wanted that a highway would one day run past. She bought quietly and waited patiently. One good decision became two, two became 10, and every dollar she made she poured straight back into the nest, never once stopping to spend it on herself, never once needing the world to know. She still wore modest thrift store dresses while quietly acquiring office towers, shopping centers, and prime real estate across the city. She still rode the bus while the empire she had built grew larger with every passing year. Why? Because the wanting to be seen was the very sickness she watched her husband alive. She had decided long ago she would never catch it. There were nights it was lonely. There were nights she wanted to run home and shake Amiri awake and say, look what I made, be proud of me." But every time she came close, he would say something small and cruel about where she came from, and she would put the wooden bird back in her pocket and keep her secret one more day. A heart learns slowly where it is safe to be seen, and Zola's heart had learned that her husband was not a safe place. That is a quiet kind of heartbreak, the kind that doesn't make a sound. Why would a woman hide what she was building from the man she loved? Hold that question. The answer is coming, and it will break your heart. Because here is what Zola learned, slowly, as the years passed. Amiri did not love the woman who mopped floors. Amiri loved the idea of rising above her. Every time he climbed a step, he looked back at her like she was the mud he'd climbed out of, and a soft heart notices these things long before it admits them. Still water runs deep, and still water remembers. Now come back to the present, to the weeks before that gala, and watch the knives get sharpened. Gabrielle did not come into their lives by accident. She was a deal maker, sharp and hungry, and she had heard the Whitfield firm was desperate. She smelled a man who could be led, And a man who is ashamed of his roots is the easiest man in the world to lead, because you only have to promise him he can cut them off. "You've outgrown so much," she told Amiri one evening, the two of them alone in his office long after the staff had gone. "The company, the city, your whole old life." She let that last word hang. A man about to stand in front of 800 people needs a certain kind of woman beside him, one who fits the picture. Amiri knew who she meant. He said nothing, but silence from a proud and frightened man is a kind of yes. Understand his motive, because this is not a cartoon. Amiri was not born cruel. Amiri was scared. He had spent his whole life terrified of being poor again, terrified of the dirt road, terrified that everyone could see the boy he used to be. And Zola, sweet and steady, was a living mirror of that boy. Every time he looked at her, he saw where he came from, and he hated the mirror more than he ever loved the woman holding it. Fear makes men do ugly things. Remember that. And Gabrielle knew exactly which fear to press. She had done her homework on Amiri Whitfield. She knew about the dirt road. She knew about the mother who died young and the father who put the name in the firm above the family itself. She knew Amiri had spent his whole adult life running from a boy nobody respected. So she never once told him to leave his wife. Oh no, she was smarter than that. She only ever told him he deserved more. "You built this," she would say, which was a lie, but a sweet one. "You, and you're still carrying dead weight from a life you already left behind." Drip by drip, poison tastes like honey when you're thirsty enough. And Amiri, remember, was always thirsty. What did Gabrielle want out of it? Not love. Let me be clear about that, because it matters. Gabrielle wanted a percentage. She wanted to be the one standing next to the man when the big deal closed, so that when the money moved, some of it moved through her hands. She had latched onto men before and left them hollow. Amiri was just the next branch she planned to sit on until a higher one came along. He thought he had found a partner. He had found a bird of prey. So the family began to plot, not with knives but with soft words at Sunday dinners. His father Otis, the old head of the firm, a man who cared for the family name more than any single soul in it, began to say things like, "Son, appearances matter now," and "You're a big man these days. People talk." His brother Terence heard all of it and said nothing, because Terence liked the new money, liked the new cars, and telling the truth would have cost him his comfort, and comfort, for a weak man, is worth more than a brother's marriage. They decided quietly that Zola should be eased out before the big signing night, the night the mystery investor's deal would be made final and the Whitfield name would shine again. They thought they were pushing out a poor woman. They had no idea. It came to a head 3 weeks before the gala. Zola was in the kitchen stirring a pot, the wooden sparrow sitting on the windowsill where it always sat. Amiri walked in and did not sit down. That was how she knew. "I want a divorce," he said. The spoon stopped moving. "I've thought about it a long time," he went on, not looking at her. "We've grown apart. I've grown. You're still—" He gestured at the small kitchen, the taped-up cabinet, the whole modest life. "You're still here. I outgrew you, Zola. That's all it is." She turned around slowly, and do you know what she said? She did not scream. She did not throw the pot. She looked at the man she had loved when he had nothing, the man she had built up in the dark, and she asked one small question. "Is that what you really believe, that you outgrew me?" "Yes," he said, and he meant it. Something in her chest went quiet then. Not broken, quiet. The way a house goes quiet right before a storm turns the sky green. He packed a bag that same week and moved into a hotel suite the company paid for, and he told his family it was over, and they were relieved. His father clapped him on the back. His brother poured him a drink. Not one of them called Zola to ask if she was all right. 12 years of marriage and not one phone call. That is how little they thought of her. That is how invisible a quiet woman can be to people who only see the loud. That night she sat alone in the dark and held the little wooden bird against her heart, and for the first time in a long time she let the tears come. Not because she still loved the man. She had stopped loving him somewhere in the last cold year, if she was honest. She cried for the waste of it. She cried for the young man he used to be, the one who dreamed at her kitchen table before the thirst took him. She cried for the 12 years. And then she wiped her face and she looked at the little sparrow in her palm, and something in her went hard and clear and calm. How much can one's soft heart carry before it breaks, or before it hardens into something they will one day regret? Zola did not know yet, but the answer was already forming. And it was not revenge, understand that. What was forming in her was not a plan to destroy anybody. It was simply a decision to stop hiding, to finally, after 20 years, let the world look up and see how high the nest had grown. And across town, in a locked office on the 40th floor of a glass tower, the same tower she once mopped as a girl of 19, a light stayed on all night. Every Thursday that light burned late, and Amiri had never once asked why. He assumed she cleaned there still. He assumed she was small. She wasn't breaking. She was deciding. Still water runs deep, and still water remembers. Now, the night of the signing, the same ballroom, the same 800 faces, and a door about to open. The Whitfield firm had been saved, everyone believed, by a single silent giant of an investor, a private group no one had ever met, whose money had appeared like a miracle 2 years ago and kept the whole company alive. Tonight, at last, the founder of that group would appear in person to make the final deal. Amiri stood on the stage in a fresh tuxedo, glowing, ready to shake the hand of the invisible savior. Gabrielle stood beside him in a striking deep ruby red couture evening gown. His father beamed, his brother clapped along with the crowd. The lights dimmed, a hush fell, the host stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "for 2 years, one investor has quietly kept this company and this family alive. Tonight, for the first time, the founder and sole owner of the Sparrow Group has agreed to join us. Please welcome the person to whom the Whitfield firm owes everything." The great doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and Zola walked back in. Gone was the modest outfit. She now wore a breathtaking champagne gold couture evening gown, elegant and flawless, and pinned at her collar, small enough that only the front rows could see it, was a little wooden sparrow. She did not rush. She did not gloat. She walked up the center of the room the same way she had walked out of it, head level, steps even, except this time 800 people rose to their feet because they thought they were honoring a stranger. Amiri's smile was still on his face when she reached the stage. It took him a full 3 seconds to understand. You could watch it happen. You could watch the color drain from a proud man's face in real time. "No," he said. Just that. "No!" The host, confused, gestured to her. "Sir, this is the founder of the Sparrow Group. This is the investor who saved your company." Zola took the microphone gently from his hand. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the father, at the silent brother, at Gabrielle, whose striking deep ruby red couture evening gown suddenly looked cheap, and finally at her husband. "Good evening," she said, calm as still water. "My name is Zola. 2 years ago, when this company was 1 week from closing its doors, a single investor kept it alive. That investor was me." The silence was total. Let me tell you what she had built, because this is the part they never saw. While they laughed at the woman in the modest peach dress, she had spent 20 years turning $40 in a coffee can into an empire worth $12 billion. A fortune larger than everything the Whitfield family had ever touched, stacked 10 times over. She did not inherit a dime of it. Nobody handed her a nest. She built it herself, in the dark, twig by twig, while they all looked up and thought she was just singing. She turned then, slow, and she looked at the people who laughed. The two women from the bar, the man in the velvet jacket. She did not name them. She did not have to. They felt her eyes and they looked at the floor. And the narrator wants you to notice that, how fast the loud go quiet when the ground shifts under them. For 2 years, Zola said, you have all wondered who the invisible investor was. You toasted him. You thanked him in your speeches. You called him a genius and a savior and a giant. A small, sad smile touched her mouth. You never once thought to look at the woman cleaning up after your party, because to you, a woman like me could only ever be the help. Amiri, she said, and her voice did not rise, and that was what made it terrible. 3 weeks ago, you told me you outgrew me. 2 nights ago, in that doorway, you told 800 people I did not belong at your table. She paused. You were standing on my floor, in my building, drinking on my money. You told me to get out. She let it breathe. So I did. I just came back to collect what's mine. You could have heard a breath drop. Gabrielle's hand began to shake around her champagne glass. Terence, the silent brother, finally lifted his eyes, and they were full of shame. And Amiri opened his mouth and no words came out, because there were none, because the mirror he had smashed had just turned out to be the whole sky. Still water runs deep, and still water remembers. And then, one by one, the walls came down. Here is the thing about a reversal. The best ones need no shouting. Zola did not scream. She did not have to. She simply stopped holding up the men who had cast her out, and gravity did the rest. She set the microphone down. She turned to the board members seated at the front tables, the real power in that room, and she spoke plainly. The deal that was to be signed tonight is withdrawn. Effective now, my group's support of this company ends. A ripple of panic ran through the tables like wind through wheat, because everyone there knew the ugly truth Amiri had hidden for 2 years. The Whitfield firm had no life of its own. It had been running on her money the whole time, a body kept warm by someone else's heart, and she had just stopped giving it. Amiri lunged for the microphone. Wait, we can talk. Zola, be reasonable. I was reasonable for 20 years. You can't do this. His voice climbed, panicked now, the king's crown slipping. Everything I built. She walked to the tall doors, the same doors he had pointed her toward, and she pushed them open herself, and she stepped out into the night with her head level and her steps even, and the little wooden sparrow catching the light at her collar. She didn't destroy them. She simply stopped holding them up. Still water runs deep, and still water remembers. Weeks passed. The city moved on the way cities do. But at the end of a certain dirt road, the little tin roof house still stood. Only now it stood proud, restored board by board, its roof mended, its porch swept, kept exactly the shape it had always been. Zola could have bought a palace on a hill. She bought back her grandmother's house instead. Because a woman who forgets where her nest began forgets how to fly. At dawn, she sat on the porch steps, the same steps where Miss Ruth used to soak her aching feet, and she held the little wooden sparrow in her open palm and let the morning sun warm it. She was not thinking about Amiri. That surprised her a little. She was not thinking about the ballroom, or the board, or the fortune, or the fall. She was thinking about her grandmother's voice and how right the old woman had been. Nobody gives a sparrow her nest. She builds it herself, twig by twig, quiet, while the whole world looks up and thinks she's only singing. And here is the truth the narrator wants to leave in your hands tonight, so listen close. A woman's silence is not surrender. Sometimes it is the sound of her building something they will never be able to take. They laughed at her dress. They pointed at the door. They mistook her softness for weakness and her quiet for defeat. And she let them, because she knew what she was building, and she knew it was rising, twig by patient twig, higher than any of them could reach. She stood up as the sun cleared the trees. She walked inside to a small shelf on the wall, and there sat Miss Ruth's sparrow in its place of honor. Beside it, Zola set down a second little bird, one she had carved herself over many quiet evenings with her own 2 hands. The next sparrow, the next twig, the next nest. Somewhere across the city, a proud man was learning how cold a room gets when you throw out the only warmth in it. But that was his story now, and his to carry. Hers was just beginning. Still water runs deep, and still water remembers. She was told she was nothing, and she answered with everything. If this story moved you, if you've ever been the quiet one they underestimated, type "She Rises" and let her know you saw the underestimated one might just be someone exactly like you. Stay soft, stay building, and never let anyone show you the door to a house you already own.
Nobody in that signing room expected her to stay calm, not when her husband crossed her name off the deed and wrote another woman's in its place. Their baby slept in her arms. The mistress smiled. The room went silent. Every eye waited for Renata to break. She didn't. She just looked at the lawyer at the end of the table, the same lawyer who had called her 2 weeks ago. The room smelled like fresh paint and new carpet, and the kind of silence that settles into places where serious money is about to change hands. Recessed lighting hummed overhead, casting a clean glow across the long mahogany table that ran the length of the conference room. Polished so well it reflected the faces of the people sitting around it. A title agent in a gray blazer sat to the left, her folder open, her pen clicking in a slow rhythm she could not stop. A notary sat beside her with his stamp on the table, his eyes making careful trips to the window whenever the weight in the room pressed too close. Gerald Okafor sat at the head of the table in a dark suit, hands folded, face still, the posture of a man who had decided before he arrived exactly how this morning was going to go. Deacon sat across from him in a leather chair. He was dressed well, pressed slacks, a dark blue shirt with the collar open just enough to look intentional. He had the posture of a man who believed the room belonged to him. His shoulders were back, his chin was up. He was already in the version of this morning where everything had gone the way he planned it, and all that remained was the paperwork to confirm what he already considered done. Simone sat beside him, close, closer than the distance between 2 people who are merely business associates. Her shoulder was pressed against his. She wore a fitted cream blouse and a pair of gold earrings that caught the light every time she turned her head, which she did often, because she wanted people to notice the earrings. Her nails were done in a pale, clean shade. Her perfume announced itself gently but deliberately. She had dressed the way people dress when they want the room to understand that they have arrived somewhere they believe they belong. Renata stood near the doorway. She had not been offered a seat. She had not asked for one. She had come into the room quietly, the way she had come into this entire situation, without announcement, without drama, without giving anyone a reason to look at her before she was ready for them to. Baby Imani slept against her chest, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket, one tiny fist curled up near her chin, as though she were thinking very hard about something in a dream. Renata's bag hung from her left shoulder. Her right hand rested flat and warm against the baby's back, moving almost imperceptibly with each breath, feeling the rise and fall, keeping count without knowing she was keeping count. The document slid across the table. Deacon glanced at it for no more than 3 seconds, maybe 2. He did not read it carefully. He had already decided what he was going to do, and reading it would only have been a courtesy to the other version of this moment, the one where he had any hesitation. He reached for the pen. He found Renata's name on the paper, and then he drew a line through it. A single, deliberate line, pressing down hard enough that the tip dragged slightly across the paper, hard enough that you could hear the scratch of it in the quiet room. He wrote Simone's name above the line in the space that had been prepared for someone else's future, and he set the pen down on the table like a period at the end of a sentence he considered finished. The title agent stopped clicking her pen. The notary looked at the window. Simone reached over and touched Deacon's wrist. It was a small gesture, unhurried and practiced. Her fingers wrapped around his arm just below the cuff of his sleeve, and she leaned in a fraction of an inch. Just enough for the lean to mean something, just enough for the room to understand exactly what it meant. She did not look at Deacon when she did it. She looked at Renata, and she smiled. Not a wide smile, not the kind that takes over a face, a quiet smile. A small, self-satisfied expression that said everything she had decided not to say out loud. The kind of smile that is designed to land in the chest and stay there. Every eye in that room moved to Renata. They were waiting. People always wait in those moments. They wait for the gasp, for the voice that breaks, for the woman to press her free hand over her mouth and turn toward the wall. They wait for the collapse, because the collapse is what they have come prepared to witness. They would have felt more comfortable if it had come. It would have confirmed the story they were already telling themselves about what was happening in this room. Renata looked down at the face of her sleeping daughter. Imani's chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm. Her lips were parted in that particular way that babies breathe when they are fully, completely undisturbed by the world they have been placed into. One tiny finger twitched in the yellow blanket. Renata looked up. She looked past the title agent, past the notary, past Simone's hand on Deacon's wrist. She looked all the way to the head of the table, where Gerald Okafor sat with his hands still folded and his expression still unchanged. He was already looking at her. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Not 2, not 3. 1 second, measured and deliberate. Then he dropped his eyes back to the papers in front of him and straightened one corner of a document with 2 fingers, a gesture so small it could have been missed entirely by anyone who wasn't watching for it. Renata shifted Imani slightly higher on her chest. Her jaw was set. Her shoulders were down. There was nothing shaking in her. No trembling lip, no wet eyes, no whitened knuckles around the strap of her bag. She stood the way a person stands when they already know the outcome of something that is supposed to surprise them. When they have already played the scene forward in their mind so many times that arriving at it in real life feels less like a wound and more like a confirmation. In her bag, folded carefully in its original envelope, was a letter she had been carrying for 8 months. She had not taken it out once in those 8 months. She had not shown it to anyone. She had not told Deacon it existed. She had simply carried it, the way you carry something you know you will eventually need. Today was the day for it. But not yet. Every person in that room thought they were watching a woman lose everything. Only one of them knew. She had already made absolutely sure that was impossible. There is something about the beginning of love that changes the way a person sees. Not just the person they love, everything. The morning looks different. And Renata had loved Deacon the way people love when they haven't yet learned to hold anything back. Fully, without calculation, with the generosity of a person who believes in people before those people have earned it. They met at a church community fundraiser on a Saturday afternoon. Deacon set down a box of water next to her lemonade station and smiled and said she looked like she was running the whole operation. She told him she was just in charge of the lemonade. He said that was the most important job there. She laughed. That was how it started. They married 2 years later in the same sanctuary. Renata wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. Deacon stood at the altar, and his eyes went full, and he wiped them quickly with the back of his hand, embarrassed. And then, not embarrassed, when Renata smiled at him from across the space between them. The pictures showed two people leaning toward each other without knowing they were doing it. The first years were tight but honest. A small apartment, a folding table they ate at for 8 months while they saved for real furniture. Renata working double shifts at a hospital scheduling office and coming home with her feet aching, and Deacon bringing her water before she had to ask. Those years were not glamorous, but they were real. Then the change began, the way change always begins. Gradually enough that you keep wearing the wrong clothes for weeks before you notice the season has turned. Deacon had always been ambitious. In the early years, that ambition had been directed outward and forward toward a life they were building together. But somewhere in the 4th year of their marriage, the direction of it shifted. It began pointing somewhere she was not standing. He started making plans in half sentences, referencing decisions he had already made before bringing them to the table. He started talking about money in ways that excluded her, not aggressively, just quietly, the way a person slowly moves a conversation into a room and then closes the door without announcing it. His sister Phyllis had always been present in the way that certain family members are present, at every gathering, with opinions that arrived before they were asked for and stayed past the time they were welcome. But in the 4th year, her presence took on a different quality. She started calling Deacon more often. She started inviting him to things that Renata was not told about until after, a dinner here, an event there. When Renata mentioned it once, gently, carefully, Deacon told her she was reading into things. Phyllis said the same thing at a Sunday dinner a week later, with a smile that landed on Renata's face like a hand patting a child on the head. "Don't be insecure, Renata. It doesn't look good on you." Simone entered through Phyllis's circle, introduced at a backyard cookout in the late summer as someone with good energy and a good business mind. She wore linen and sandals and shook Renata's hand with both of hers, holding it warmly, and said it was so nice to finally meet her. The word finally settled somewhere in Renata's chest that she couldn't quite locate at the time, like a small stone dropped into deep water. Finally. As if she had been a topic of discussion before they were introduced. As if her arrival in this moment had been anticipated. Deacon said Simone was just someone Phyllis knew. He said it twice. Once was enough. Twice was a tell. After that cookout, the small things accumulated the way they do when something is wrong beneath the surface, and the surface is being held deliberately smooth. A bank account Renata discovered during a routine check of their finances, a joint savings account she had not been told about, opened 8 months earlier. A property search on Deacon's phone that he explained away in one sentence and then never mentioned again. A real estate attorney's name scrawled on a notepad near his desk that he said was just a contact someone had given him. Nothing serious. Then one Tuesday morning, Renata opened the mailbox and found a letter. It was addressed to both of them. Formal letterhead from Gerald Okafor's law office, a real estate attorney downtown. The letter was a formal confirmation notice. It named both Renata and Deacon as the intended co-owners of a residential investment property, pending the completion of the final closing. It confirmed that both signatures would be required as a condition of the original purchase agreement on file with the county. Renata stood at the kitchen counter and read it 3 times. Deacon was at work. The house was quiet. She read it once for the facts, once for what the facts implied, and a third time because she wanted to be certain she understood what she was holding. Then she folded it carefully back into its envelope and placed it in her bag. She said nothing about it to Deacon. She kept carrying the letter, and she kept watching. Some truths arrive in the middle of the night when the house is completely still, and a woman is the only one awake, and the weight of what she knows settles onto her shoulders in the dark without ceremony. Renata was in the nursing chair at 2 in the morning, with Imani warm and heavy against her, when she heard the soft sound of a laptop screen coming awake in the kitchen. She had not left it open. It had come out of sleep on its own. Or Deacon had left it open before coming to bed. Or someone's search had resumed while the house slept. She didn't know which. She only knew the light was there in the other room when it hadn't been before. She shifted Imani carefully to her shoulder, rose from the chair, and walked to the kitchen doorway. The laptop sat open on the table. The screen was bright in the dark room. An email thread was open on it, visible from where she stood without needing to move any closer. The email was from Deacon to Simone. It referenced the address of the property. It contained a closing date, 3 weeks out. The subject line, which Renata read and then read again to make certain she had understood it correctly, said, "Our next chapter." She stood in the doorway for a long time. Imani made a small, sleepy sound against her neck. Renata pressed her lips to the top of the baby's head and stayed there for a moment with her eyes closed and the kitchen light on her face and everything she had suspected for months, now fully confirmed in a single email thread that someone had not been careful enough to close. Then she went back to the bedroom. She put the baby down gently in the bassinet beside the bed. She came back to the kitchen. She stood in front of the laptop, and she photographed the screen with her phone. She did not close the laptop. She turned off the kitchen light, went back to the nursing chair, and sat in the dark with her phone in her lap, and her thoughts moving in slow, deliberate circles. 2 days later, Sister Claudette called. They were not close. They knew each other by face and by name, by the occasional exchange before service, and the neighborly affection that develops between women who occupy the same pew rows over the course of years. But Sister Claudette had been carrying something for 3 weeks that had grown too heavy to keep, and she could not, in good conscience, hold it any longer. She had been at a dinner gathering, a small group at a restaurant across town. Phyllis had been there. Simone had been there. And at that dinner, Phyllis had talked about Renata. Not generally, specifically. She had talked about Renata's fears, the ones Renata in the privacy of their own bedroom, in conversations she had believed were between two people who trusted each other. She had talked about a night shortly after Imani was born, when Renata had cried and told Deacon she felt invisible, felt like she was disappearing inside the life they had built. Felt this at a dinner table in front of Simone. She worries, her specific doubts, the precise language of her private pain. She had been doing it for over a year, feeding Simone the tools she needed, piece by piece, word by word. Renata's own vulnerabilities placed carefully into another woman's hands. Sister Claudette spoke carefully and with evident discomfort, but she did not leave anything out. Renata thanked her. Her voice was steady and warm. She said she was glad Sister Claudette called. She said she appreciated it more than she could express. After she hung up, she put the phone on the kitchen table and sat looking at the wall for a very long time. Long enough that the light outside changed. Long enough that she heard Imani stir in the other room and then settle again. Then she picked up the phone. She scrolled through her contacts to a name she had saved weeks earlier, after looking up the return address on the letter that had been living in her bag, after sitting with the question of that letter long enough to decide she needed to understand it fully before she knew what to do with it. Gerald Okafor, attorney at law. He answered on the second ring. They spoke for 14 minutes. The room where Renata sat was quiet, and the conversation was low and focused, and the audience does not hear what Gerald says to her in those 14 minutes. What the audience sees is Renata's face, the way it moves through several quiet expressions, each one a fraction more settled than the last. The way her shoulders, which had been carrying the specific tight weight of sustained, unacknowledged grief, slowly come down. The way her hand, which had been restless on the table, goes still. And near the end of the call, there is something that enters her eyes, not relief exactly, and not anger, and not grief. Something quieter and more purposeful than any of those. Something that looks, from the outside, a great deal like the moment a plan becomes a decision. She says, "I'll be there. I just need you to let it happen first." She ends the call. She reaches into her bag and removes the folded letter. She smooths it open on the table and reads it one final time, following every line with the careful attention of someone who wants to make sure they have not misunderstood any part of what they are holding. Then she folds it back along its original creases and tucks it into the bag and closes the clasp. The days between a decision and its consequences are strange days. They look like ordinary days from the outside. Nothing dramatic happens in them. The sun comes up and goes down. Meals are made. Babies are fed and bathed and put to sleep. But under the surface of those ordinary days, a woman was doing something quiet and methodical and total. Renata met with Gerald Okafor on a Thursday morning at his office. She arrived 10 minutes early and sat in the lobby with Imani in her carrier until his assistant called her back, and then she walked in and sat across from his desk with the calm of someone who has already had the harder conversation with herself. Gerald walked her through what she had partially understood from the letter and now needed to understand completely. He had been the original attorney on this property transaction, retained based on the initial purchase agreement, which had been filed with the county 8 months ago. That agreement named Renata as a required co-owner of the property, not a preferred co-owner, not a listed party who could be substituted, a legally required one, whose notarized signature was embedded in the original county filing as a condition of sale. Without her signature, the transfer was not merely contestable, it was invalid. Deacon had never read that original filing in full. He had handed those pages to someone else and assumed the details had been handled. He had assumed, as he had been assuming for several years about several things, that what he decided was automatically what was true. Simone had been shown only the version of the paperwork that Deacon controlled, and so she did not know this condition existed. Neither of them had looked closely enough at the foundation to see what was actually holding the building up. Gerald had reached out to Renata the moment Deacon's office contacted him to schedule the formal closing, because her name was still in his file, and his legal obligation to her had not disappeared simply because Deacon had decided it had. He asked what she wanted to do. She told him she wanted to proceed exactly as Deacon had requested. Same room, same parties, same date. She wanted Deacon to sit down at that table with full confidence. She wanted Simone beside him. She wanted the room to contain everyone who had played a part in this, so that when the floor gave way, no one who deserved to be present for it would miss it. She also asked if she could bring one person, not a legal witness, simply someone who had been made aware of what Phyllis had done and who she wanted present to see the full picture. Gerald said that was within his discretion. On the way home, Renata called Sister Claudette and asked her to come. In the days between that meeting and the closing, Deacon lived inside his confidence the way a man lives inside a warm room with the windows blacked out. He talked about the property to his friends, sent Simone photos of design ideas, spoke about the closing date as though it were already in the past, already done, already won. He called Phyllis and told her things were finally moving. Phyllis listened and felt something close to satisfaction. 2 days before the signing, Renata called Phyllis. She kept her voice warm. She said it was going to be a big day for Deacon, and she thought the family should be together for it. She said Phyllis had always been important to Deacon, and she should be there. Phyllis said she would come. Renata hung up and began preparing a bottle for the baby. Her movements were unhurried. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window, and she stood in it, and she was not shaking. The Sunday before the closing, the congregation settled into their pews, and the morning moved the way good Sunday mornings move, slow and warm and full of familiar voices. Deacon sat 3 rows ahead of Renata with his phone angled slightly in his hand. Simone was not there. Her absence was its own presence. It occupied the space between them like something that had been left in the room even after the person who brought it had gone. Phyllis sat across the aisle and had been watching Renata since she walked in. There was something different about Renata that morning, not in what she was wearing. The difference was in the quality of how she was sitting. Settled, the way someone sits when they have already arrived at a destination they have been moving toward for a long time. Not the stillness of waiting, the stillness of having already decided. The longer Phyllis watched, the more the thing that started as curiosity developed an edge. She could not name it, only feel it, and it began when she looked at Renata and found herself unable to predict what she was looking at. That feeling had never been associated with Renata before. When Renata looked up from the baby and caught Phyllis's eye across the sanctuary, she gave her a small smile. Calm and complete. The kind of smile that does not need anything from the person who receives it. The thing in Phyllis's chest tightened. The morning of the closing, Deacon moved through the apartment quickly. He dressed with the efficiency of someone who does not want to slow down, because slowing down might mean thinking, and thinking might introduce doubts, and there was no room for doubts today. He told Renata the signing was straightforward, just paperwork. She didn't need to be there. She told him she would come anyway. He shrugged. It was the kind of shrug that says, "You don't matter enough for this to be worth fighting about." He picked up his keys. In the car, Imani slept in her seat. The morning was clear. Deacon drove with one hand on the wheel and his mind already in the conference room, where this chapter of his plan was about to be officially finalized. At a red light, he looked over at Renata. She was watching the road ahead. He said she had never really understood how business worked, that she had always thought smaller than the situation demanded, that some people were built for comfort and others were built for something larger, and he had come to understand which of those things he was. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed too many times in private, easily, casually, as though it were simply an observation he was offering from a place of patience and mild pity. Renata looked out the window. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the car. It pressed against the glass and filled the space between the seats and settled around the sleeping baby like something physical. Deacon did not say anything else. The light changed. He drove. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is say nothing at all and let the clock run out. Renata had the folded letter in her bag. She had carried it for 8 months. She had not once removed it, not once used it, not once let Deacon see it or know it existed. Today was the last morning she would need to carry it. She looked out at the road ahead and let Deacon drive them both into the room she had already prepared. Gerald Okafor was already at the head of the table when they arrived. The title agent was in her seat. The notary had his stamp in front of him. The room was the same room from the beginning of the story, and the story had now arrived back at itself, ready to move past the place where it had opened. Sister Claudette was already seated near the door. She had arrived before anyone else, which was what Renata had asked her to do, and she sat with her hands in her lap and said nothing when Deacon walked in with Simone beside him. Phyllis came in a few minutes later. She was still wearing her coat, as though she had not fully committed to being there. She sat in the back of the room. Her eyes moved to Gerald and stayed there for a moment too long. Something in her face changed in a way she did not control. She looked down at her hands. The document was produced. The formalities were begun. And then it happened the way the story said it would happen. Deacon took the pen, and without ceremony, without hesitation, without so much as a glance at the woman standing near the door, holding their sleeping daughter, he drew a line through Renata's name and wrote Simone's above it, and set the pen down. Simone's fingers found his wrist. Her eyes found Renata. The smile arrived on her face and stayed there. The title agent stopped clicking her pen. The notary looked at the window. Renata stood near the doorway with Imani warm against her chest. She did not move. She did not speak. She looked at Gerald Okafor at the head of the table. He looked back. Deacon slid the document forward. Simone reached for the pen. Gerald placed his hand flat on the document. He did it without theatrics, without a raised voice, without any shift in his expression. He simply placed his hand on the paper, and the paper did not move, and Simone's hand stopped reaching. "Before we proceed," Gerald said, "I need to address a legal matter with this filing." Deacon leaned back with the mild impatience of a man who expects this to take 30 seconds. "What matter? Everything's in order." "Not quite," Gerald said. He opened the folder at his left and removed a document. He placed it on the table, turning it so the text faced the room. The original purchase agreement, filed with the county 8 months ago, names Mrs. Renata as a required co-owner of this property. Her signature is not a recommendation or a formality. It is a legal condition of the original sale agreement of record. Any transfer that does not include her notarized consent is invalid under the terms of that agreement. The pen in Simone's hand hovered above the paper. Deacon looked at the document in front of Gerald. He looked at it the way a person looks at something that has appeared in a place where they were absolutely certain there was nothing. The blankness that came over his face was not anger. It was the particular expression of a man encountering the outer wall of the thing he did not know he had been standing inside. "That's not," he started. "I never signed anything that said—" "You signed the initial purchase agreement," Gerald said, "which was attached to the county filing. The co-owner requirement has been in the record since the day that filing was made. I have an obligation to enforce it." Deacon's jaw moved. Nothing came out. Then Renata walked to the table. She moved unhurriedly, without announcement, without drama. She reached into her bag with her free hand. She removed the folded letter, the same letter she had been carrying for 8 months, folded along its original creases, worn just slightly soft from handling. She placed it on the table beside Gerald's official copy. 2 identical documents, side by side. The same letterhead, the same language, the same date, the same conditions. One from his file and one from her bag. The room looked at both. "I received that letter 8 months ago," Renata said. Her voice was even, low, unhurried. "I read it the morning it arrived. I folded it back up and put it in my bag, and I have carried it every day since then." She looked at Deacon. He was looking at the letter the way a person looks at something they do not recognize, even though it has their name on it. His eyes moved across it, and something shifted in his face. Not quickly, but visibly, the way understanding arrives when it is unwelcome. "I knew from that morning," Renata said. "I knew what this property was. I knew what my name on that filing meant. And I knew that if I waited and said nothing, and let you believe you were in control, I would find out exactly what you were willing to do." She paused. She looked at him steadily. "Now I know." The silence that came into the room then was not the silence of awkwardness. It was not the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of a room full of people who had all understood something at the same moment, and none of them had the language for what to do with it. The title agent closed her folder and set it flat on the table. The notary set down his stamp in a motion so careful and deliberate it made no sound. Simone's hand came down from above the paper. The pen was still in it, but it no longer had anywhere to go. Renata looked at her. Simone's face had rearranged itself into something flat and guarded. The light that had been in her expression earlier, the warm, satisfied certainty of a woman who believes she has already won, was gone. What remained looked considerably smaller. "You can keep the pen," Renata said. She turned to the back of the room. Phyllis was sitting with her coat still on, and her hands in her lap, and her eyes fixed on the table surface in front of her. She was not looking at anyone. She was looking at the table the way people look at a fixed point when they are trying to hold themselves very still. "And you can go home," Renata said. Phyllis stood. She did not look up. She picked up her bag from the floor beside her chair. She walked to the door. She passed Sister Claudette without looking at her, and Sister Claudette watched her go and said nothing. And Phyllis went through the door, and the door closed behind her. Then Deacon found his voice. "Some men do this. At the worst possible moment, when the right thing would be silence, they find their voice." He leaned forward, and his voice rose and shook, and he said she had done this deliberately, that she had sat on this information to humiliate him, to embarrass him in front of these people, that she had held it back not for any righteous reason, but because she wanted the moment, because this was who she had always been, and he was not going to sit here and, Mr. Deacon. Gerald's voice was not loud. It did not need to be loud. It was simply certain in the way that certain things are certain, and it cut through the middle of Deacon's sentence the way a clean line cuts through something softer. I would advise you to stop speaking. Deacon stopped speaking. He sat back in his chair. His hands were flat on the table. The document in front of him, the one with the line through his wife's name and another woman's name written above it, sat between them like a record of a decision he could no longer defend. Renata reached for Imani, who had begun to stir, and she lifted her daughter with both arms and settled her against her shoulder. She adjusted the yellow blanket, tucking it back around the tiny body with careful, practiced hands. Then she walked to the door. She stopped at the threshold. She did not turn around. Her back was to the room, and her daughter was on her shoulder, and her voice, when it came, was quiet and clear and completely final. You should have read the fine print. Then she walked out. The way things collapse when they have been built on deception is never as dramatic as the moment of exposure. The moment of exposure is loud, but the collapse is quiet and slow, and it has a way of going on much longer than anyone expects. The property deal was finished. Without Renata's signature, and with the legal record now fully in play, the transfer could not proceed. The seller had been waiting out delays long enough and withdrew from the agreement in the 72 hours that followed the failed closing. The deposit Deacon had placed, funds he had moved from an account that held money Renata had contributed to over years of double shifts and careful living, was gone. That loss triggered a financial review he had not anticipated and could not contain. Numbers that had been arranged with confidence began showing their actual shape. Simone disappeared from the situation with the clean efficiency of someone who had never built anything fragile in the first place. The relationship that had felt like a prize, that had been constructed on the foundation of another woman's private pain and a man's arrogance about what he deserved, revealed itself without that foundation as having nothing beneath it. She did not return his calls in the second week. By the third week, she was simply not there, the way certain weather passes through and leaves the air cold in its wake, reminding you of how warm it felt before it arrived. Phyllis faced the quieter and, in some ways, more complete consequence of social understanding. Sister Claudette had been in that room. She had heard what Renata said and seen what Phyllis's face did when she heard it. In their church community, the kind of understanding that travels between people without being formally announced had done its work. Phyllis found herself standing in familiar rooms that had somehow become smaller. Conversations that had previously included her began finding other directions. It was not an announcement. It was an absence, and absences in communities built on relationship are their own form of consequence. Deacon tried to reach Renata twice through mutual friends in the month following the closing. Both times, she did not respond. She was not nursing wounds. She was simply done with the architecture of a life that had been designed without her real participation, and she had no interest in returning to its ruins. 6 months after the closing, the afternoon light came through the front window of a house that belonged to Renata. Only to Renata. Her name was on the deed, a different deed, in a different office, with a different lawyer who had asked her to confirm her identity and witnessed her signature, and handed her a copy and said, "Congratulations," and meant it simply, without complication. The house was modest. The porch needed painting eventually. The yard was small, but had a square of grass in the back that caught the late afternoon light perfectly in the hours before evening, when the sun came low and the grass went gold, and everything in it seemed to be leaning toward the warmth. Renata sat on the front porch in a wooden chair with a cup of tea she had made half an hour ago and not yet finished. The table beside the chair was small, a side table she had found at an estate sale, the kind of piece that has a story you will never know. On the table beside the chair, behind a thin square of glass in a simple wooden frame, was the folded property letter. She had not opened it since the morning of the signing. She kept it the way you keep something that reminds you of the moment you chose to wait instead of react, to know instead of show, to let the right moment come to you. Imani was in the grass at the bottom of the porch steps. She had learned to crawl in the weeks after they moved in, and she had become extremely good at it in a short time, moving through the yard with the single-minded determination of someone who has recently discovered the concept of elsewhere and cannot be stopped. She crawled to a dandelion that had gone fully to seed, a perfect white globe on a thin green stem, and stopped. She studied it with the concentrated seriousness of a person conducting important research. Then she looked up at Renata. Renata looked back at her. Her face went soft in the way that only one person in the world could make it go soft. And she leaned forward slightly in the chair. And she said something quiet that was not quite a word and not quite a sound, but was somewhere between them, the private language of a mother and a very small child. Then, down the street, a car appeared, moving slowly, the kind of slowly that is not about traffic or navigation. The car moved down the street at the reduced speed of a person who is trying not to appear to be looking while they are looking. And it passed the front of the house, and through the window of that car was the outline of a man who had once believed that what he decided was automatically what was true. The car slowed in front of the house. Renata did not look up. She was watching her daughter, who had reached for the dandelion and caught it, and the seeds scattered instantly, dozens of them, white and weightless, drifting on the warm afternoon air in every direction at once, floating up and sideways and away, too light and too many to catch. Imani reached for them as they went. She made a sound, the kind of sound that is not quite a word yet but is moving toward one, feeling out the shape of language from the inside, learning the names of things she has not named yet. The car kept moving. It did not stop. Its engine faded slowly, and then there was only the yard and the afternoon, and the dandelion seeds still drifting on the air, catching the light as they went, and Imani's hand reaching after them, and Renata watching her daughter reach for things that were already free. Some people think silence is weakness. They look at a woman who doesn't shout and decide she has nothing to say. They look at a woman who waits and decide she has surrendered. But there is a kind of knowing that does not announce itself. There is a kind of power that does not need a crowd. There is a calm that is not the absence of feeling. It is what feeling looks like when it has found its footing and settled into something the wind cannot move. Renata had known the moment that letter arrived in her mailbox what she was holding. She simply waited for the right room to open it. And when that room was full, when every person who had played their part was in their seat, she placed the letter on the table and said what needed to be said and picked up her daughter and walked out. That is not what weakness looks like. That is what a woman looks like when she has decided who she is, and nothing in the world has the power to rewrite it. If this story reminds it with someone who needs to hear it today, and stay close, because every week